All right, so if you've been following this channel for quite some time, you know that at my core, I'm an Android guy. I mean, I use mostly Pixel products, and as of right now, my daily driver has been the Pixel Fold. But I wanted to do something a little bit different because over the past few months, I have been using the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I've got some thoughts I really want to share with you guys. Let's dive into it. Now, I mentioned, like, at my core, first and foremost, I'm an Android guy. I love that OS. It suits me and it fits me very well. But especially here in the States, you get a lot of pressure from people that use iPhones to say, like, why don't you just get an iPhone? So I figured I'd give it a try. Now, this is not my first rodeo with an iPhone. In fact, before this phone, I used primarily the iPhone 10, which came out in 2017. And that should tell you something, because the fact that I didn't feel a need to upgrade it until more recently means that, for me at least, the experience hadn't really changed. And so I wanted to give it like another go and just kind of see like what has drastically changed over the past almost 7 years. Let's start with the design. As you can see, I'm rocking this without a case. It doesn't mean that I don't own a case that I sometimes will slap on it, but I will give kudos to Apple for the design because it's a very comfortable phone to hold in the hand without a case. And I've never really been concerned about dropping it either. This year they're using titanium, which is supposed to be a lot stronger. It's supposed to be dent and more scratch resistant. I'm not brave enough to test that out, but I don't typically drop my phone. So I've been using this without a case and it's very comfortable. The weight is very light, especially for the size of the phone. So I find it to be like my go-to phone for like surfing social media apps, or like really when I want to like wind down and maybe I'm laying down and using the phone. This has probably been like my go-to phone for that. Now, the iPhone 15 Pro Max, man, that feels like a mouthful to say, but this version of the iPhone is sporting a 6.7-inch display. And I will tell you, this is a big phone. I have relatively long fingers and I usually don't have any problems reaching different parts of the phone. But for some reason, this phone, I always have problems reaching like the top left-hand corner. You got to do like some hand gymnastics, or you got to two-hand it to be able to reach that top left-hand corner, which I find really weird sometimes because the way that the iOS navigation works, sometimes there will be an arrow or a button that you have to press in the top left corner, which is hard to reach. Now, I know that there is, what do they call it, reachability, where you can swipe down on the screen and it makes it a lot easier to use. But I mean, I don't really like having to do that. But regardless of like maybe sometimes the hand gymnastics you have to do, it is a nice size phone and screen for watching content, especially if you have to turn it on its side in landscape. Watching YouTube videos on it and movies and different content is relatively good. And on top of that, I will say that using the phone and the screen itself and like the animations, it all adds up to like a really smooth experience. My experience with my Pixel phones has not been the same. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are buttery smooth, but on top of that, sometimes I will get like weird stutters or like animations that don't quite finish or they crash. And I think this just kind of speaks to like the longevity that Apple has had and how they largely control like almost every minute piece of their equipment so that it works as intended. I haven't had any of those animation drops or frame rate drops or stutters or anything like that since using this phone. And I gotta say, it does really make it feel like a premium device. And you know what also I will give Apple credit for? This gets plenty bright out in the sunlight. So whether I'm going out and using it on a bright sunny day, I can still see the content just fine. Although it doesn't get dim enough for me if you're using your phone in the dark. Maybe if they had like an extra dim feature, like which is found on Pixel phones, that might be helpful. But it is really responsive. It brightens up almost immediately when I need it, and then it'll dim down just the same. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. I mean, Apple did a good job with the hardware and the display on this phone. But I want to switch gears and I want to talk a little bit about performance, because it's one of like the pillars of Apple. Is they always tout how powerful their chips are that they put in their devices. And this phone is no slouch. It does have the A17 chip inside of it. But one of the things that I always just kind of remind people is like, even though you have a high ceiling as far as like computational power, most of the apps and things that you're doing on your phone, you're not going to come anywhere near being close to that. But you can also make the case that, well, it does help with the longevity of the phone, and Apple is known for supporting their phones for many years. In fact, my iPhone 10 just stopped being supported, I believe, like last year, which is kind of why I stopped using it. But yeah, I mean, everything runs smoothly, especially social media apps, they run smoothly. I really haven't had any problems with like running out of RAM or anything crashing. And I mean, that's a good thing also. Now let's talk battery life. Remember, I'm doing this video from the perspective of I'm an Android user first, but I have been using this iPhone, and I recently went on vacation out of the country, and I will say that this phone allows you to charge up to 80%. So I never really charge it up to 100%. I've never had to. And then typically by the end of the day, I'm putting it back on the charger I have 20%, maybe a little bit less. So that's like a 50-60% swing, depending on the kind of day that I'm having. Whereas on my Pixel phones, you don't have any control of that. So you're always charging to 100%. And then I'm putting this back on the charger usually with about maybe 20 to 30%. So I'm using 70%. I will say the iPhone is kind of like the battery king. And I think a lot of it has to do with the app optimization, which we'll touch on later. But it just feels like it just sips power throughout the day gradually. I never really see any time where I have like these massive drops in battery life. And that's a good thing considering that like it doesn't give me anxiety about do I have enough charge to last through the day, or can I run only certain apps without worrying about my battery life tanking before the end of the day and then having to find a charger. Because on the flip side, this phone does not charge very fast. And if you're not going to have fast charging, you have to have great battery life. And I think that Apple nailed it with that. Okay, I do want to touch on the cameras, right? Because for the longest time, it seems like Apple has been known for having a great camera system. But I will say mainly when it comes to video, I like the options that Apple is adding where, especially for content creators, you're able to do so much now with the video from this phone. In fact, I've been fooling around with Final Cut Camera, which gives you a lot more granular control. Right now, nobody's really touching that when it comes to video. But I will say, I hate the pictures that come out of this phone. It's not to say that the iPhone takes bad pictures, but I will say that the image processing for like your point and shoot photos, to me, is terrible. They tend to be very warm. They tend to crush blacks. And I don't like it. Now, I understand that this is highly subjective and like people are going to disagree with me, but that's just my personal take. Over the years, I've just really been a fan of the way that Pixel phones take photos, especially of people of color, because then we don't look washed out and ashy in the photos or like underexposed. It just does a great job. So me coming from a Pixel phone over to an iPhone and taking photos, like I can immediately recognize an iPhone photo and I don't like it. I mean, you like what you like. I just don't really care for the photos out of the iPhone 15. So we've reached this point. I want to talk about the iOS experience as a whole, because regardless of how good the hardware is of a product, if the software is not as good, it really doesn't matter. And what I mean by this, and maybe this is just a me thing, I think iOS is the weakest part of the iPhone. Sure, there are some great features that people really like, and they're mainly social, like their iMessage, FaceTime, and AirDrop. That's why everybody tells you to get an iPhone, just so they can use primarily those features. But outside of that, like as a personal computer, I feel like it does a terrible job. And let me explain. So you ever like download a photo or download a file to your phone? For some reason, Apple decided that it should go to your iCloud first. But what if I don't want to download it to iCloud? I want to download it to the device. Well, it's kind of cumbersome to do that. And then it's even harder to find the file. And then when you finally do find the file, sometimes the OS doesn't know what to do with the file, so it'll just randomly display the code of the file instead of opening it. And I just think that makes for a bad experience if you're trying to do like productive things on this phone. Whereas my experience largely on Android has been like it has a great file system. Like you can download directly to your device, you can find the files relatively easily, you can share them relatively easily. And it just, to me, it feels more intuitive. So that could just be a me thing, but I'm not really a fan of file management on iOS. I think it really could use some work. In addition to that, notifications on this phone, this ain't it. This ain't it. I'm not sure why Apple decided to do it this way, but it's almost like you'll get a notification. If you don't address it right away, then it will hide the notification. And I mean, I typically will have like notifications that for some reason I missed it and it was like 5 days ago. So all these times that I've been thinking, I'm like, man, like I text this person and I know they have an iPhone. Why haven't they responded? 9 times out of 10, it's probably because they didn't address it right away and it just got buried underneath the lock screen somewhere and lost in whatever void the iPhone sends its notifications to. So I know iOS 18 is bringing a lot of changes to the iPhone this year, but I really, really, really want them to address notifications because those two things are probably like the main reason that this could not be my primary driver. Now, I do have to give credit where credit is due. I will say that on iOS, the app experience has typically been better, and it's hard to really describe why. I mean, there's some things that stick out to me, like maybe certain animations that are added to certain apps. The native camera integration for social media apps on iOS just seems to be better. And then like typically just when you compare the iOS version with the Android version of an app, it just seems like the Android version is an afterthought and sometimes it's missing certain features or the features just come way later. And that's not a great experience if you're an Android user. But I've really grown to appreciate it on iOS. You get like updates, everybody gets the features at the same time. So there's really no like feature parity within apps on iOS. It's only when you compare them from iOS over to Android. Now, I do find it funny because the iPhone does get regular software updates and security patches every single month, but I usually never notice when we get them. And that's because usually it will update maybe over the course of the night while it's on the charger. And if I miss one, I get a notification that says, hey, would you like to install this now or install it later? I think that's really nice. And then the fact that everyone gets the update at the same time, that's nice as well. But I haven't found that you get really anything new when these updates come in. See, I'm used to on Pixel phones, every 3 months you get, they call it Pixel feature drop. So you get a new set of features that come to the phone, makes it feel fresh, makes it feel new, and usually they're pretty useful. Whereas Apple chooses to wait for like these larger software drops, like versions, where they're gonna then add features, like a ton of features all at once. So I like the stage rollout because it just gives you something to look forward to. But I do like having all of my updates all at once whenever they come out on the iPhone. Okay, and the last thing I want to touch on with this phone is this year they added the action button, and I have largely renamed it the Tesla button because that's what I've mapped it to. You press and hold the action button and you can choose whether it's a shortcut that you want to open up. I know a lot of people use it for the camera or maybe the assistant that you want to use on your device, but I call it my Tesla button so that I can open the Tesla app, I can unlock the car, start preconditioning the cabin, whatever I need to do, just at one click of a button. And I do think that's really, really useful. Now, we do have something similar on Android, and that's changed over the years. It used to be squeeze to allow you to do certain functions. Now it's more of a double tap. So if your phone is unlocked and you double tap the back of the phone, you can set that to open an app or a certain action. Very similar to having the action button. I will say I like the button a little bit better because sometimes the tap sensitivity on certain phones is not, very sensitive or it's too sensitive. I just think a button is the better way to do it. So I'm a huge fan of the action button that they added to this phone. Okay, and I know I said that was the last thing, but one last thing. I've really been enjoying finding accessories is really, really easy for the iPhone because everyone has one. So everyone has iPhone accessories. If I need to go into a store and grab something, I can just grab something for the iPhone, and that's nice. Whereas usually if I want something for my Pixel devices and it's not a Samsung, Samsung is like a different story. But specifically for Pixel devices, usually I have to order something and wait for it to come in the mail. It would just be nice if Pixel phones continue to grow in popularity for us to see more products in stores. So all in all, I will say this is actually a really good device for most people. It's not necessarily my cup of tea to make it my primary driver for like quite a number of issues, and maybe I'll make a video about it, but Apple is gradually adding more and more features that are very similar to Android. However you feel about it as an Android user, you can say they're copying Android, but whatever. I like just having access to those features on whatever device I choose to use. And so right now, the iPhone will continue to remain as my secondary device. But they've come a long way, and I have to give Apple credit where due. Now, it is July right now, so I would not recommend that you go out and purchase this new. If you can hold off and you want another phone, just wait till September till they release the next versions of the iPhone, or see if you can catch it secondhand for maybe a little bit cheaper if you really just want to try it. But those are my thoughts on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. What are yours, especially if you're an Android user? I want to know what is your perspective and what are your thoughts on the iPhone and where it's headed. Drop those down in the comments below. And as always, remember to like and subscribe. I appreciate everything that you guys do to help this channel grow. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.